Tropical forests play a critical role supporting life in our planet. These ecosystems hold a large percentage of the global biodiversity and provide goods and services to millions of people. Tropical ecosystems are also important for climate regulation because they capture and store large quantities of atmospheric CO2. The tropical montane areas of South America are particularly important for biodiversity conservation. In this region, certain montane forests hold extremely high levels of species diversity and endemic species. In Ecuador, these areas are located toward the northwest and southeast of the country.
Currently, our forest monitoring network has dozens of permanent plots. In natural forests, we are learning how species are distributed in elevation gradients. In restoration areas, we are learning how fast diversity and carbon stocks can recover after degradation.
The project has trained several master students for universities in Belgium and Ecuador and has offered field courses to train a new generation of scientists.
At the beginning of this year, I had the opportunity to visit Ghent University for a training. It was a great experience for me because I learned many positive things for improving my knowledge. Also, I have the opportunity to meet several scientists.
This project funded my master studies and my field research. I received a lot of training from the Ecuadorian and Belgian scientists involved in the project, so I am now ready to begin my doctoral studies in tropical ecology.
Our research group in Ecuador is implementing a network of many plots in reforested areas. And during the next year, additional plots will be integrated across the Andean region. Also, the project has a high interest to understand the stakeholders' perceptions about restoration in their localities. Of course, it will support to maximize the success of restoration efforts in Ecuador.
Our organization BOSPLUS is also part of this network. BOSPLUS is an international NGO who supports different projects in South America. Especially here in Ecuador, we link to the FLIR network in this project with reforestation projects. For us, it's really important to apply scientific knowledge, but also to do scientific research on the projects we execute and then learn from them. So this FLIR project has been really relevant. We've been studying different areas, also using natural forests and comparing them to the reforestations we are doing.
As a Flemish promoter of this project, I can conclude that this is a very rewarding project for me, because I feel we have a strong impact locally for restoration, nature restoration policies, but also because this project is a very genuine scientific collaboration through which I have learned and I'm still learning a lot. And finally, because the data we have been collecting together in the forests of Ecuador are really unique data on tropical mountain forests that have allowed us to do research which goes much broader than Ecuador alone. And finally, because with this unique plot data from Ecuador, we have contributed to global efforts. We have submitted our data to global databases of forest plots in the tropics. And these global databases are really crucial to understand better the global importance of tropical mountain forests in the climate change and global carbon cycle contexts. If everything goes well, you should see now the results of our first poll. And the 3 questions, can you all see that? Christophe, can you maybe raise your hand if you can see the results? I'm not sure if you can see it, but I can tell you that most of you have answered the questions, and it's quite diverse. I think 40% of you have indicated that you're interested to find out more about tropical forests. And even more people are interested to hear more about restoration actions in Ecuador, and we will for sure talk about that today. Some are interested in results of a VLIR project, so it's quite well spread. How did you identify yourself? We have quite a few university students in here. 2 farmers or landholders, 2 people who are involved in restoration funding, 5 restoration practitioners, and then we have at least 20 scientists on board, a person in policy making, few people from government, and 12 others. And I think some of them have identified that in the chat. I have seen that there are people from NGOs and so on. We have quite some participants from Ecuador today, and 7 people from elsewhere in South America, also Bolivia and Colombia. It's good to see that. We have people from Europe and from Belgium, of course, but I see that we also have people from US. And in the chat, I have seen that there are multiple African people attending as well. So it's really a pleasure to see that we have this broad audience today. To continue with this session, what we will do is we will show another short video, which is presented by Selene Baez, our local promoter in Ecuador, and she will give some facts and figures about this reforestation project that we are monitoring in the north of Ecuador. And based on that information, we will go then within 10 minutes or so to the interactive part of this session, in which we will discuss multiple topics with a few panel members, and we will take also as many as possible questions from you in the chat. So Christoph, can you share the presentation of Selene now?
Today, I will present a summary of the project consolidating a forest monitoring network in a human-dominated landscape in northwestern Ecuador. The project has been active for about 3.5 years, and it will close by the end of 2022. I would like to highlight 2 aspects of this project. First, that is, it focuses on forest monitoring, including aspects related to biodiversity and ecosystem function. And second, that it takes place in areas that have a strong human influence, yet they still have much of their original diversity and natural forest cover. We aim at understanding the dynamics between nature and people in order to support actions leading to biodiversity conservation and sustainable development. For this reason, the project has put much emphasis in building collaborations with local conservation practitioners. The project has been led by scientists based in Ecuadorian and Flemish universities with expertise in plant, ecosystem, and restoration ecology. Here we have Hans Verbeek, Selene Baez, and Mahen Wouters with expertise in modeling, carbon cycling, plant community ecology, and biochemistry, respectively. In the restoration area, we have Jimena Palomeque, who has developed her scientific career exploring forest restoration in Andean ecosystems. And we have the restoration expert, Michael Perrin, based at the UK Centre of Ecology and Hydrology. We have been very lucky to have the support of a truly amazing team of talented biologists with different skills who have made it possible to conduct biodiversity research across spatial scales. Among the conservation practitioners, we have Debbie Early, who has been working with us from the beginning, and she is associated to the Belgian NGO BOS Plus. Brian Kronke and Leila Lopez, they both work for Mindo Cloud Forest Foundation, that is an organization that brings together many field conservation and restoration initiatives in the Andean Chocó. And we have Eduardo Toral from FONAPA, an organization that focuses on managing, preserving the resources of one of the most important hydrological basins in Ecuador, They all have been very, very important to conduct our project. So what are our goals? Our first goal, and the overarching one, is to understand the effects of climate and land use change on biodiversity and ecosystem functioning. We know that both climate change and human activities are affecting diversity, but this is likely to be non-linear along elevation gradients. It is also important to understand how fast we can recover diversity and functioning through ecological restoration. Second, we aim at supporting efforts of conservation, restoration, and sustainable development in the Indian region. And third, we need to train young tropical ecologists through international exchange. Now I will present some of our results. With regard to our forest monitoring network, we now have more than 30 permanent plots in 5 different areas along a 3,000-meter elevation gradient. For some of the plots, we have 2 census, so it is possible to estimate tree growth rates and carbon sequestration rates. This year, we began to establish permanent plots in secondary areas, so we will know how fast secondary forests can recover diversity and carbon. All our forest data has been contributed to the global database Forest Plots, and it was used to produce this very nice paper that presents our current knowledge on tropical forest responses to global environmental change. By contributing our data to Forest Plots, we're ensuring data quality, safe storage, and sharing our data with larger research initiatives. With regard to the Restored Forest Network, we have now more than 150 permanent forest plots in the north, and we expect to have at least 100 plots in the south by the end of this year. To our knowledge, this is one of the most ambitious monitoring efforts of restored areas in this country. What have we learned thus far? Well, first, we have learned that in this gradient, as elevation increases, forests can store more carbon. However, this doesn't mean that they can capture carbon faster. We have also learned that soils can act as sinks of methane, that is a powerful greenhouse gas. This gives us insights into how these forests can help to mitigate climate change. We now have an idea of how much biomass can restored forests store. Per year, these areas, restored areas in our study sites, can store 4 tons of biomass per hectare per year. We also have results regarding about the types of species that should be used for restoration. Animal dispersal of seeds is key for diversity recovery in restoration areas. So if we want to recover tree diversity fast, we should plant trees that have seeds dispersed by animals. We have also found that lianas and trees have different physiological limitations among elevation gradients, and these patterns hold for both Ecuador and Rwanda. These findings allow us to make better predictions about how these 2 groups of goody plants will respond to changing climatic conditions. Our project has also contributed to education. Here is a picture of the first course we taught in 2018. We had 22 students from 5 different countries. It was a very, very enriching experience for all of us. Our impact on education has been substantial. We have promoted the formation of 7 master's students, 2 of which are now involved in PhD programs. And we now have the first PhD student of our project. Here you can meet Franklin Marin. He is the first PhD student involved fully in our project. He will extend our forest monitoring in restored areas in the south of the country, and he will conduct restoration experiments along an elevation gradient. In this way, we will know what species are more suitable for restoration in different elevations, and we will also know what traits make this species better for restoration. Franklin will work with the fellowship provided by Ugent University. Thus far, we have identified several challenges that we need to overcome to continue our work. For example, long-term monitoring is costly, and there are not many sources of funding for this kind of projects. It is also not easy to find landowners willing to commit for research for restoration over long time periods. And this is a real difficult issue because it makes it difficult also to understand how the socioeconomic drivers are acting and for successful restoration practices. Here we have a map of the priority regions for restoration in Ecuador. You can see that our study areas in the north and in the south need urgent interventions. However, restoration is rarely done using guidelines based on solid ecological research. There is a usually lack of communication between restoration ecologists and restoration practitioners, and often local involvement is very deficient. These are issues we need to overcome in order to improve our work. And before ending this presentation, I would like to thank to all the people that has made this project possible, especially to the students and to the organizations that in many different ways have made possible our work.
Okay, thank you very much, Selena, for that overview of the project and the results of the project. And then we can go to, I would say, the interactive part of this session. So we have a bit more than half an hour left to discuss. And we have a few panel members online. We have a few people that work on the reforestation in practice. We have Brian Kronke and Leila from the Mindo Cloud Forest Foundation. Hello, Brian and Leila. We have Debbie Erali from Bos Plus, which she's based in Ecuador, working for the Belgian NGO Bos Plus, involved in multiple restoration projects, including the one we are monitoring in the north. We have Eduardo Tonal. He's from an organization called Toral, an organization called FONAPA, who's working on water conservation in the south of Ecuador. And then we have multiple people from the academic world. We have the local promoters, Jimena from University of Cuenca in the south of Ecuador, and Selena from Quito, the EPN Institute in Quito. And we have also Mike Perring from Center of Ecology and Hydrology in the UK, a restoration ecologist who is also intensively involved in our project. And we will organize this session along a few questions that I will ask to the public with the poll, and you can give some answers, and the panel members will be able to comment on the question and on the answers the public has given. But feel free to also ask questions in the chat. If you have additional questions, we will try to answer those as well. And I will launch the first question for this interactive part of the session. And I hope you can all see the question now. The question is, what do you understand by the term ecological restoration? You can select one of the potential answers. We have given 4, and if you think it's something else than those 4, you can also fill it in the chat. So the first one is ecological restoration is actually returning an ecosystem back to its original state. Secondly, it's the process of assisting the recovery of a degraded ecosystem. Thirdly, is returning an ecosystem functionality to a system without considering the diversity of the system. 4, it's enabling people and nature to thrive. And 5, it's your own answer. So I will give you a few more seconds to give an answer here. And then I will ask panel members to react, and we can maybe, well, if any one of the panel members wants to react, please raise your hand. And if not, I will ask your reaction, but I'm still waiting for a few persons to answer. Don't worry if you don't know the answer. You can also click none of the above. I assume not everyone in the audience is a restoration expert or has a strong opinion on the definition of ecological restoration, but I think it's good to start a discussion with defining more precisely what we are talking about. Good. I think about 70% of the people have answered, so I will end the poll and I will share the results. So as you should be able to see the results now. So most of the people have given answer 2, namely that ecological restoration is the process of assisting the recovery of a degraded system. And the second most popular answer was returning an ecosystem back into its original state. So I'm looking now to the panel members, and particularly to Jimena and Mike. Are you willing to comment on that?
Go ahead.
I can, Hans, if you want.
Yes, Mike, please start.
Go ahead,
Mike, and then.
Well, I think it. Sorry, Hans.
Please go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. I don't know how many people are aware, but the second answer here is kind of the official definition in the SER primer that's then been kind of updated and looked at in the Principles and Standards of Restoration, the second edition that have come out. But what I find really interesting on this is that approximately a third of people are thinking about that it's returning a system back to its original state. And I think I'd be really interested in hearing from other panel members, particularly the practitioners as well, you know, how much do we want to be aiming for something like that in a time of environmental change? So is this actually a good option to be thinking about?
Okay, thank you, Mike. Jimena, do you want to comment on that?
Oh, well, yeah, I'm surprised that most of the people answered the first 2 options, and yeah, for me it's right that they answered that questions. Just to say that as a scientist, to recover the ecosystem to the original state is quite hard. It's not easy, and it takes a lot of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jimena. And I see in the chat that there is a question that maybe can be answered by the people from MCF or BOS+. The question is, to what extent the interaction between nature and people improved due to the project? So to what extent the livelihood of the local, and to what extent the local livelihood of the local community is improved? I don't know, maybe Leila or Brian, do you want to give a first reaction on that?
Sure, thank you, Hans. And to Batya, who asked the question. Our work in this project and all the others involves local community members on the staff, on the farms where we work. And this type of project and work means new income, a new source of income in some cases that continues, while not huge amounts of income that replace an entire farm system. They can be a component of a farming system. So I think that to some extent there are improvements in income. To talk about the entire livelihood of a community, that maybe is beyond our scope, or at least as we see it. But there are very certain individual cases of people who have got new skills, new jobs, farmers who've gotten new income, and then going forward, all the environmental services that will be improved for them, their family, their children.
Okay, thank you for that reaction. Debbie, do you want to comment on that from the perspective of BOS Plus?
Yes, thank you very much, Hans. So I'm Debbie. I work for BOS Plus, which is a Belgian NGO who works in different countries abroad, 3 countries in Latin America, but also some in Africa. So I'm happy to see also some people from Ethiopia present, where we do have some projects. And I was really, it was really interesting to see these answers, because of course, for us as a development cooperation NGO, to call it like that, all our projects which are focusing on restoration always have this human aspect as well. No, it's never really about restoring nature just for nature. So the first option is never our option, because we always take into account the local people who live in the region where there is still forest, or where all the forest has been gone, and they really feel the need to restore their services. So for us, the second option is like the only real one. And then I was also into that some people also indicated I think it was the third one, which is really focusing purely on people to be able to thrive together with nature. And it's always a tough balance. No, I think a lot of people here present know from practice that it's always like finding a way to be able to restore nature, and at the same time also be able that people can have a good life, depending on the definition you give on that. But so in most projects, we really actively look for planting species which also have uses for people, which can be fruits, which can be woods in the long term, and we always take that into account. So there are a lot of projects which have the aim of carbon sequestration, which really have a pure productive aim, which is like having wood to grow as fast as possible to sequester as much carbon as possible. But in our project, we really have these different dimension, and always the social aspect is an important one.
Okay, thank you, Debbie, for that reaction. I suggest we move to another question that we have prepared for you, and that question should now appear on your screen. And it's a question which might be difficult for you to answer, and that's no problem, because that's also our main research question, actually. It's what do you consider to be the most critical factor for successful ecological restoration? So you have to select one answer that you agree with the most. So is it finding sufficient funding? Is it effective implementation of the reforestation by practitioners on the ground, so using state-of-the-art techniques? Do you think that side factors are the most critical? These could be different environmental factors that enable plant growth and survival. The fourth option is a good species selection, so planting the right tree species in the right place. Would it be removal of threatening processes, so processes that threaten the stability of the system or the restoration? Would it be, the next option is, would it be landscape factors that enable plant survival and growth? So compared to side factors, it means more large-scale factors. Would it be effective maintenance of the restored sites after implementation? is the local community buy-in a very important factor, or do you have your own idea of another critical factor that we did not list? In that case, you can write the factor in the chat. So I'm waiting a few seconds more to have some more answers. And what I can see is that the three factors that have most votes, I think all have to do with the human factor. It's like the local community buy-in, it's the effective maintenance by the landowners and practitioners, and the second one, effective implementation of the project. While the others, I would say more biophysical, site and landscape factors are received less votes. And then the funding, the species selection and removal of threatening processes scored somewhere in between. So I think this is a very interesting question, and I think there might be multiple opinions about that. And I've seen in the chat that Eduardo from FONAPA has posted a question, and the question is that there must be a link with socio-economic benefits for the local people to be successful. And he's asking a question, have you thought about including them in future studies? But I would maybe first like to ask Eduardo if you would like to comment on that yourself first. Eduardo, could you maybe elaborate a bit on the question that you just asked? Can you unmute yourself, or maybe I need to? Yes, now you should be able to unmute yourself, Eduardo. No? Are you able to do it now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hola. Sorry for my English. I need Jimena help with my translation. Jimena, lo que estaba mencionando es que básicamente los estudios se centran en la parte biológica, en responder qué especie es más apta, cuánto se demora, cuánto crece, pero normalmente nos olvidamos de medir los aspectos socioeconómicos, los beneficios a la gente local. Y ese factor, aunque no sea parte de la cuestión biológica o ecosistémica, es muy importante para conseguir el compromiso de las comunidades. Entonces, lo que yo trataba de preguntarles es que si en estudios futuros la academia consideraría incluir este factor para medirlo y estudiarlo.
Okay, thank you, Eduardo. I will summarize his question, and he's asking that most of the studies are focused on biological studies, but not always we consider the local people in these studies. So he suggests, or he thinks that it's very important to include the local people and also related to the economy of these communities in the reforestation project. So he suggests that we should include in our studies the thinking of the people.
Okay, thank you for the translation, and thank you for the question, Eduardo. Is there someone from the panel members that wants to comment on that? Yes, Brian, I think you should, yeah, should be able to unmute yourself. Yes.
Yeah, I think Eduardo is absolutely right. I mean, at least in this part of Ecuador, and I'm sure many other parts of the world, the economy is tight, and unless financial incentives or socioeconomic factors are aligned between the participant and the long-term restoration goals, it really doesn't work. We've found some better success with people who have land and are working in or developing ecotourism projects on their land, such that their interest long-term is to have native forest. And so a restoration project fits them to, hand in glove. Other cattle farmers who you try to encourage them, say the steep part of the land where it's by the river, let's try to restore. Sometimes it works, but sometimes, the cattle are hungrier or the economy is worse than their desire to continue to participate.
Okay, thank you. Brian, is there anyone else of the panel that wants to give an opinion on that? And I also wonder, I think there's a lot of awareness of the fact that this is important, but I wonder, could we include that more in our research? Myself, I'm also not coming from the socio-economical sciences, so we always approach these projects from a more biophysical view. We are measuring the environment, and we're often not, or we not always have the tools to study the impact of the socio-economic factors. So does someone of the panel members have suggestions or ideas how we could include that factor both in the implementation of projects and in the research of around these projects? I don't know. Mina, do you have a suggestion, or Michael?
Oh, Debbie has, I think, Hans.
Mm-hmm.
No, we go ahead, Michael. I continue after you.
No, I was, well, I've actually put a message to Hans in the chat in that I've forgotten the master's student name who was working a bit on the socioeconomic side.
We had a student a few years ago, a student from Belgium that has interviewed some stakeholders in the area. So he interviewed both landowners, people involved in the local policies and so on. But it's difficult to drop.
We can pass the word to him because Jens is also participating, so he can just briefly explain that.
Sorry, Jens.
I hadn't seen that Jens was also on board. Yeah. Well, Jens,
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Jens. Yes.
Hi. Nice to see you all again. Yes, I'm happy that people are also thinking about the socioeconomic part, because I think this is a huge challenge for reforestation. In my research 3 years ago, I talked to so many people already involved in the project, from Minder Cloud Forest and Bos Plus, and now I have the opportunity to say that reforestation projects here with the organization are doing such a wonderful job. They actually give people prospects, they give them hope, they give them a future, and it's wonderful to see what it can do. But it's so difficult to convince cattle farmers, for example, such as Brian already said, and there are so many challenges there. Now, actually, I was wondering, I have a question, because my investigation was about explicitly motivations and drivers, but I was wondering, now that I'm actually back in Ecuador now, I was wondering what the COVID pandemic had as an impact on those socioeconomic drivers. I think it must be huge because it relates to local markets, people wanting to sell their products, agricultural products who are not being able to export it, and yeah, that has a huge impact on reforestation. I think that it has a negative impact, but it might be an interesting question to ask. And I'm wondering if somebody knows already, and maybe Brian or somebody from the organization can have information on that.
Okay, thank you for that interesting question, Jens. I don't know, Brian or Leila, can you briefly comment on that?
I think I'm going to help with the translation. Sobre el efecto económico de COVID que hemos visto.
Sí, buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias por permitirnos participar. Sí, hay un efecto que se puede visualizar en la gente, la necesidad de buscar nuevas alternativas de ingresos económicos, puesto que el nivel de empleo ha bajado bastante, mejor dicho, el desempleo ha subido mucho en esta temporada y la gente ha optado por buscar otras opciones, ¿no? para ingreso. Y esto ha afectado mucho a nivel del uso del suelo, puesto que hay bosques, hay sitios de bosque o de crecimiento o de regeneración natural que están siendo talados para cultivos, para nuevos cultivos de ciclo corto, como son acá en la zona La Naranjilla, que incluso utilizan muchos productos químicos, excesivamente utilizan productos químicos, y otros cultivos que les pueda permitir la subsistencia de algún modo. Entonces, esto ha hecho que en algunos sitios donde el terreno ya estaba en proceso de recuperación, la gente va a buscar la importancia que tiene lo económico más que lo ecológico. Eso hemos visto en algunos puntos acá en el...
What she was saying is that, yes, we've seen, and hi Jens, 3 years later, that we have seen in certain parts a quite marked effect of COVID and the lack of employment, or the growth of unemployment. I think many people who had left the country to go live in the city have come back, and sometimes for subsistence or for new cash crops, have cleared areas that were in processes of kind of natural regeneration and restoration to make new plantings to survive the pandemic, right? I think, and that was a sort of short version. I don't remember everything she said, yeah. But I think that gets the gist of it. I've also seen that in a few particular cases, a certain group of kind of wealthier landowners, even retirees from Quito, have come back to their properties as a way to escape the city and the pandemic. And some of those people have been requesting trees, and we've done some restoration work with them, and particularly on the road near Milpe, on the Milpe Road. So we've seen a mix, but that subset of people that have this sort of better economic status and can afford to not think about their immediate subsistence. I'm having trouble with that word. It's a subset that probably is a small percentage, and it's probably just strange because they live right near where we're working and they're friends of ours.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Leila, for that answer, and Brian for the summary.
Maybe just to add a bit to that, I think it's really complex, and it would be a really interesting question of research because, yeah, as Brian and Leila commented, there are like some opposite movements because of the pandemic. What I really saw living in the Amazon region in Ecuador is really like getting back the focus to the local part of our story. So like before, like export was also a big driver. Like in the beginning of the pandemic, like everyone was like getting back to their local places, and of course the subsistence as well, to produce their proper products, going back to the chakras, which are the traditional agricultural systems here. So what I saw was like an improving interest and also importance to our local environment, and also to reforestation. So I don't think it's only for the the richer part of the population, but I also saw that it was something which was really strong at the beginning of the pandemic, and it's also like yeah, disappearing already, this effect. But I think it's a really interesting question to look to those yeah, how COVID and its effect on different drivers to deforestation or also to reforestation, you can also like benefit from them, no? In identify really well which are the interesting yeah, interesting effects, and it's also psychological, as someone comments in the chat. So it's really it would be a really interesting multidisciplinary research. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Debbie, for that additional comment. And I think this discussion that shows that in addition to all the factors that we have already listed, that the pandemic should probably be added as an additional complicating factor determining the potential success of restoration projects. I suggest that I go to our last question because we have only 10 minutes left. And the last question deals with the difference between what we call active restoration, which means humans planting trees actively, versus passive restoration, which is actually leaving the land alone and leaving the ecosystem, the forest, to develop itself naturally without intervention. So just seeds that are there start to grow. And you get a natural succession from a grassland to a forest, for example. And the question is, what do you think is the main benefit of this active restoration? So people planting trees. Do you think the main benefit is that it can really involve the local community actively? Or that it enables ecological restoration to be accelerated, to go faster? Does the active restoration show that land is being actively cared for by people? Does it make participants feel good? It's a bit linked to the first one, involving local community or participants. Or do you have another idea? That's the last option. Why, and then you can fill it in the chat, why you think active restoration can have an advantage compared to passive restoration. And while you're answering that question, I can say that this is also an active question of research, because depending on the conditions, we are not really sure what is actually the most effective way of restoring a forest. Sometimes it turns out to be very effective to just put a fence and leave the land alone and let the forest develop with the seed bank that is available. And in some cases, it might be better to plant the trees actively. So I wait a few more seconds and then I will close the poll because we have only a few minutes left in this session. Okay, so I see that now 70, well, some answers are still coming in quickly now, but there is a kind of clear pattern emerging from the answer. So I will end the poll and I will share it with you. So the majority of the people here in the audience thinks that the main advantage is that active restoration can actually accelerate the process. And then some others think it's also beneficial to involve the local community and the other answers. So is there anyone from the panel that wants to react on that? In the meantime, I also see in the chat that this human involvement is very important to provide direction to restoration to meet specific outcomes that would be useful for humans and also wild animals. Okay, I see that Mike has raised his hand. Mike, can you comment?
Yeah, I was sorry, I wasn't going to comment on the humans and wild animals. It was just more on the reacting to the accelerating the restoration. Yep. So, and it's actually throwing it round the other way. So prior to coming to Ecuador, I used to be in Australia, and there were a series of restoration treatments there in a jarrah, so it's a eucalyptus woodland forest system. And what they actually found, having done various active restoration techniques, it was actually the passive restoration of just letting some of the plots do their own thing, that in terms of their targets, which was getting native biodiversity back, in the longer term, it was the ones where they hadn't done anything that actually got the closest to the targets than where they'd actually tried to. So I was kind of throwing this, we posed the question as though active restoration is will be more beneficial than passive for various reasons, but maybe that isn't always the case. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Mm-hmm. I guess it depends on the target as well. If your target would be only carbon sequestration, the answer might be different than if you have, I would say you have multiple targets, including both biodiversity, soil conservation and carbon sequestration together. So I think it depends also on that. Yeah. Is there anyone else from the panel that wants to comment on that?
Debbie's raised her hand, Hans.
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to comment on it because it's also a really interesting factor for funding. Like we see a lot of financiers, so as Plus, which is a Belgian NGO, we have a lot of contact with financiers in Europe. And for them, it's really like the thing of feeling good and doing something actively. That's like their most important driver. So although letting like an area just restore itself, it's like it's not active enough to show their support. So we often have this struggle. It's also like the difference between ensuring conservation versus active restoration. It's like conservation, it looks like something passive because it's a forest which is already there, you just leave it. It's like something you don't really add to. So I think it's a really, well, I see it as a really big challenge for organizations as Bospus and our local partners as well, to make sure that we make clear that, as Mike comments, that in a lot of cases it's more efficient to just let it passively restore and just take some measurements to assure that. So I think it's work we have to do to make sure that it's also results from science that are taking back not only to the field but also to financiers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Debbie. Unfortunately, it's 2 minutes to 5, so I'm afraid we will have to close this session.